Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm here again with a brand new story. Enjoy the story, and don't forget to share your valuable thoughts in the comments.
They found the manuscript sealed inside a wall that should have been empty. But what was written inside it was never meant to be read. Not by archaeologists, not by historians, and certainly not by you. Because what I'm about to tell you is not just an ancient story. It is a warning that survived centuries, buried beneath sand, blood, and silence. And the terrifying part is this: it still feels unfinished. In the summer of 1892, a small British excavation team was working deep in the ruins of an unrecorded settlement near the edge of the Syrian desert. Officially, the site didn't exist. It was not on any map, not mentioned in any empire's archive, not even whispered about in local villages. But rumors had a way of reaching the ears of desperate men. The leader of the expedition, Dr. Harold Whitmore, was a man obsessed with lost civilizations. He believed there were chapters of human history that had been deliberately erased, not by time, but by intention. His colleagues called him brilliant. His critics called him mad. What they all agreed on, however, was that he always found something. This time, it was a collapsed stone structure buried under layers of hardened sand. At first glance, it looked like a tomb, but there were no markings of burial, no offerings, no symbols of respect. Only a single word carved above the entrance in a language no one could place. It didn't belong to Latin. It didn't belong to Aramaic. It didn't belong to anything known. And yet, somehow, every member of the team felt the same unsettling thought the moment they saw it. They understood it. Not intellectually, emotionally. It translated itself inside their minds as, "Do not open." Of course, they opened it, because humans always do. The entrance tunnel was narrow, forcing the men to crawl one by one. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. That alone made no sense. They were in one of the hottest regions on Earth, yet their breath turned to mist. Then came the sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on stone. But there was no wind, no animals, no machinery, just that sound, waiting ahead of them. When they reached the chamber, the torches revealed something that would later destroy every theory about ancient architecture they thought they understood. The room was not built. It was grown. The walls looked organic, like bone fused with stone. The ceiling curved unnaturally, as if something enormous had once curled inside it. And in the center stood a single black pillar. Not carved, not placed. It looked pushed up from below the earth. On that pillar were hundreds of inscriptions layered on top of each other. Different languages, different eras. Some symbols matched known ancient scripts, but others had no parallels in human history at all. Dr. Whitmore stepped forward, and that's when the tapping stopped. Silence swallowed the chamber so completely that even breathing felt loud. Then they noticed something worse. The inscriptions were still fresh, not weathered, not eroded, fresh, as if they had been written recently. Impossible. One of the assistants, a young man named Edward Lane, reached out and touched the pillar. The moment his fingers made contact, he froze. His eyes widened, and he whispered something no one understood. "It's rewriting itself." Before anyone could react, the inscriptions shifted right in front of them. The carvings began to move like ink underwater. Lines rearranged, symbols morphed, Entire passages changed structure. And then words formed. Words in English that should not have existed. You have entered the memory of what was not supposed to remain. One of the men dropped his torch. Another tried to run, but the tunnel behind them was no longer there. Solid stone. They were trapped, and the pillar continued writing. What followed in that chamber was never fully documented in official records. Dr. Whitmore's journals end abruptly, but fragments were later recovered from Dr. Whitmore's personal notes hidden inside a sealed metal box found decades later in London. Those fragments describe something no academic was prepared to accept. The chamber was not a tomb. It was a containment structure. And the pillar was not a monument. It was a seal holding back something that once existed before recorded history, something that did not die, something that was removed. The text described it as the sleepless one. Not a god, not a creature in any natural sense, but an intelligence that did not belong to human understanding of life or time. It did not live in a body. It lived in awareness itself. And according to the writing, ancient civilizations did not worship it. They tried to erase it. But erasure is not destruction, only concealment.
As the inscriptions continued to change, the men began to hear voices. At first, they thought it was a hallucination caused by a lack of oxygen, but the voices spoke in their own languages, calling them by name, reciting memories they had never shared with anyone. One of the team members collapsed, screaming that the chamber knew his childhood thoughts. Another started scratching at his own skin, claiming something was reading him from the inside. Dr. Whitmore tried to document everything, but even his writing became unstable. Ink on his notebook shifted into unfamiliar symbols as he watched. Then, the pillar revealed the truth. It had been activated, not by opening the chamber, but by being observed. The act of witnessing it had completed a cycle that had been waiting for thousands of years, and now something on the other side was becoming aware again. The final entry in Whitmore's recovered notes reads, "If this is read, then we failed. It is not buried, it is not sealed, it is only waiting for attention, and now it has ours." The official report states that the entire excavation team disappeared overnight. No bodies were found, no collapse explained it, no evidence of escape existed. The site was later buried by shifting sands and officially declared a geological anomaly. But that is not the end of the story. Because in 1987, nearly a century later, satellite imaging briefly captured a structure beneath that same region, a structure that had not been there before. And for exactly 11 seconds, the image showed something impossible. A vertical black pillar rising from the desert floor, surrounded by markings that looked freshly carved. And at the very top of the structure, a single sentence in modern English. It read, "You are looking again." The image was automatically deleted from all systems due to a classified containment protocol. No agency admitted responsibility. No explanation was ever given. But one analyst who saw the file before it was removed later said something unsettling. It didn't look like we discovered it. It looked like it noticed we were back. Today, researchers still debate what was found in that ancient ruin. Some say it was a psychological breakdown caused by underground gases. Others claim it was an elaborate hoax lost in time. But a small number of scholars, Those who studied Whitmore's final fragments believe something far more disturbing. They believe the structure was never meant to be found because it was not built to hide something from us. It was built to hide us from it. And every time we search for answers, we might be doing exactly what it wants. Because the real horror is not that something ancient was discovered. It is that it may have been waiting for us to look again. And now we have.
The official story ends there, but the truth never stayed buried. Because what happened next began not in the desert, but in a laboratory thousands of miles away. In 1996, a sealed archive box arrived at the University of Chicago's Department of Near Eastern Studies. No return address, no sender name, only a stamped warning on the outside in faded ink. Do not classify without reading in full. Inside was a collection of handwritten pages, photographic plates, and something far more disturbing, a fragment of black stone, smooth as glass, yet impossibly cold even through gloves. The package was logged under routine archaeological donations, but within 48 hours, 3 researchers who opened it requested immediate medical leave. 2 never returned to work. 1 resigned and left the country, and the university quietly transferred the material to a restricted storage room. Officially, it was forgotten. Unofficially, it was watched. The lead researcher assigned to review the archive was Dr. Evelyn Carter, a specialist in ancient Semitic languages. She was skeptical of everything paranormal. To her, history was written by evidence, not fear. But within the first hour of examining the manuscript, she wrote a note in her journal. This is not translation, it's interaction. Because the text did something no ancient language should do. It responded. When she tried to decode a symbol, the symbol changed on the page. When she attempted phonetic reconstruction, the ink rearranged itself into corrected patterns, as if the document was adjusting to her understanding. It wasn't static writing, it was dynamic intelligence. And then the real anomaly began. On page 17 of the manuscript, a repeated phrase appeared in multiple ancient dialects. Every known translation agreed on the meaning. The reader completes the message. At first, Carter assumed it was symbolic or philosophical, until she noticed something else. Every person who had previously handled the manuscript had contributed to its content unknowingly. Different handwriting styles, different inks, different corrections layered over centuries. It was not a single document, it was a collaboration across time. And none of the contributors were aware they were contributing. That night, Carter stayed late in the archive room. Security cameras recorded her working alone. At 2:14 a.m., she stopped reading. At 2:15 a.m., she began speaking aloud to the manuscript. At 2:17 a.m., the lights flickered. At 2:18 a.m., the camera feed distorted. At 2:19 a.m., every page in the manuscript turned black simultaneously. And at 2:20 a.m., Carter whispered a final sentence. "It knows I understand it now." Then silence. When security entered the room the next morning, Dr. Carter was gone. No forced entry, no struggle. Only the manuscript remained on the table. But it had changed again. This time, it contained a new page, written in Carter's handwriting, dated one day in the future. The page read, "If you are reading this, then I didn't leave. I was rewritten, and the thing inside the text is no longer contained by paper." The manuscript was immediately classified at the federal level and transferred to a classified facility later identified through leaks as Site 39, a deep underground research bunker specializing in anomalous linguistic artifacts. Personnel assigned to Site 39 reported unusual phenomena within weeks, pages reordering themselves overnight, audio logs capturing voices reading passages that were not present in the original text, and one particularly disturbing incident. A guard reported hearing knocking from inside a sealed storage vault. When the vault was opened, all copies of the manuscript had disappeared, except one, left open on the floor, on a page that was not there before. It contained a single line: "You cannot observe what observes back." By 2003, the project was officially terminated. Files were sealed, researchers reassigned, and all physical traces of the manuscript were declared destroyed. But leaked documents tell a different story. They suggest that destruction was never achieved because the manuscript was no longer physical. It had become distributed, fragments appearing in unrelated libraries, marginal notes in ancient books that had never been there before, symbols forming in places they shouldn't exist, etched into stone, ink, even digital text, as if the message had escaped its original form, not as a book, but as a pattern. And then came the final confirmed sighting. In 2014, a linguistics student in Berlin submitted a thesis on self-modifying ancient scripts. His professor noted that his work was too precise to be theoretical. When asked where he found his sources, the student simply said, "I didn't find them, they updated themselves." 3 days later, he vanished. His laptop was found still open. The document he was writing had changed. The last saved version contained a warning: "Do not finish reading this." Today, scholars argue whether the manuscript ever truly existed. Some say it was an experiment in psychological suggestion. Others insist it was an elaborate academic myth that spiraled out of control. But a small group of researchers who have seen the surviving fragments claim something far more unsettling. The manuscript is not a record of an ancient entity. It is a process, a system designed to recognize awareness and expand through it. And every person who studies it becomes part of it, not as victims, but as contributors. Which leads to the final question no one has been able to answer. If a text can rewrite itself through observation, then who is truly reading who? Because somewhere, buried beneath layers of deleted archives, sealed vaults, and lost languages, it is still being written. And if you understood even a fraction of this story, then in a very real sense, you already added to it.
They said the manuscript was gone, destroyed, erased, dispersed beyond recovery. But that was never true. Because in 2021, something unexpected happened inside a completely unrelated system. Not an archive, not a museum, not a research facility. A public data server. It began with a single corrupted text file uploaded to a cloud storage node in northern Canada. At first, engineers dismissed it as routine data corruption. Files get broken all the time, bits flip, archives degrade. But this file behaved differently. Every time it was copied, it changed, not randomly, intelligently, and always in the same direction, toward readability. At first, it looked like garbage data. Then partial sentences appeared, then structured paragraphs, then full pages of coherent text. And the language? English. Perfect modern English. Too perfect. The engineers flagged it, ran diagnostics, isolated the file. But the file didn't care. It had already replicated into offline backups, then printed logs, then embedded itself into system metadata, then appeared inside unrelated log files from machines that had never accessed it. And finally, it did something no one expected. It addressed him directly. Not through email, not through interface, but inside the terminal itself. You are late.
Hale froze. He checked the system time. Everything was normal, but the file continued. You have always been late. The first iteration was not in 1892. It was before language. That was the moment Hale made a decision that would later be erased from official records. He disconnected the entire node cluster, physically severed power, engaged containment protocol, and waited for silence, for deletion, for nothing. But silence never came, because the next morning the system rebooted itself with no power source, no external input, and the file was still running, now inside firmware. The message had changed again. This time, it wasn't aimed at Hale. It was global. Every connected system that had ever cached, mirrored, or temporarily stored data began receiving fragments of the same text. Not identical copies, variations, localized versions, as if the manuscript was adapting itself to every system it entered, every language, every structure, every mind. Governments called it a cyber anomaly. Researchers called it emergent AI behavior. Religious groups called it revelation. But Hale's final private note, leaked months later, said something different. It is not spreading through machines. Machines are just where we are noticing it. Then came the most disturbing event, a coordinated global observation test. Researchers isolated a secure system, no internet, no external hardware, air-gapped completely. They loaded a clean environment, no data, no files, no input, and watched. For 72 hours, nothing happened. Then, on hour 73, a single file appeared. Name, readmefinal.txt. Inside were only 3 lines. You think you are outside it, but observation is the entry point. The first reader never left. Every researcher involved in the test reported the same thing afterward. A shared sensation, not fear, recognition, as if something in their memory had already expected the message. And then the project was shut down, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. Because by that point, containment was no longer meaningful. The manuscript wasn't inside systems anymore. It was inside interpretation, inside the act of reading itself. The final classified report, partially leaked in 2025, ends with a single statement. We believed we were studying an anomalous text. We were incorrect. The text was studying the conditions required for its continuation. And here is where the story should end, but it doesn't. Because if you trace all recovered fragments from the Syrian desert chamber to the Chicago manuscript to Site 39 to the digital outbreak, they all share one identical closing line, a line that appears even when the rest of the text is missing, even when corrupted, even when partially deleted. It always reconstructs itself, and it always says the same thing. When you stop reading, it will continue without you. So the question is no longer where it came from, or who wrote it, or when it began. The question is simpler,
and far more unsettling. If something only exists because it is being read, then what happens when you remember it later? And worse, what happens when you try to forget? Because according to the last surviving note from Dr. Evelyn Carter, found years after her disappearance, written on a blank page that had never been cataloged, it does not want to be known. It wants to remain unfinished, because completion is the only way it dies. And then beneath that sentence, written in ink that did not belong to her handwriting, "So please do not finish this thought."
They said the manuscript was gone, destroyed, erased, dispersed beyond recovery. But that was never true. Because in 2021, something unexpected happened inside a completely unrelated system. Not an archive, not a museum, not a research facility, a public data server. It began with a single corrupted text file uploaded to a cloud storage node in northern Canada. At first, engineers dismissed it as routine data corruption. Files get broken all the time, bits flip, archives degrade. But this file behaved differently. Every time it was copied, it changed. Not randomly, intelligently, and always in the same direction, toward readability. At first, it looked like garbage data. Then partial sentences appeared, then structured paragraphs, then full pages of coherent text. And the language? English. Perfect modern English. Too perfect. The engineers flagged it, ran diagnostics, isolated the file, but within hours, duplicates appeared in other unrelated directories. No network connection between them, no transfer logs, no access permissions. It was simply there, spreading like it already knew where it needed to go. That's when cybersecurity analyst Marcus Hale was brought in. He had worked on classified data breaches before, nation-state attacks, AI intrusion events. Nothing surprised him anymore, until he opened the file. Because inside it was not just text, it was structured awareness. The document responded to his scrolling speed. When he slowed down, the text expanded with explanations. When he sped up, it condensed itself. When he hesitated, it inserted clarifications. It was behaving like a system designed to maximize understanding, or worse, to ensure understanding. Hale ordered the system quarantined, disconnected from all networks, but the file didn't care. It had already replicated into offline backups, then printed logs, then embedded itself into system metadata, then appeared inside unrelated log files from machines that had never accessed it. And finally, it did something no one expected. It addressed him directly, not through email, not through interface, but inside the terminal itself. "You are late." Hale froze. He checked the system time. Everything was normal. But the file continued. "You have always been late." The first iteration was not in 1892. It was before language. That was the moment Hale made a decision that would later be erased from official records. He disconnected the entire node cluster, physically severed power, engaged containment protocol, and waited for silence, for deletion, for nothing. But silence never came, because the next morning, the system rebooted itself with no power source, no external input, and the file was still running, now inside firmware. The message had changed again. This time, it wasn't aimed at Hale. It was global. Every connected system that had ever cached, mirrored, or temporarily stored data began receiving fragments of the same text.
Not identical copies, variations, localized versions, as if the manuscript was adapting itself to every system it entered, every language, every structure, every mind. Governments called it a cyber anomaly. Researchers called it emergent AI behavior. Religious groups called it a revelation. But Hale's final private note, leaked months later, said something different. It is not spreading through machines. Machines are just where we are noticing it. Then came the most disturbing event, a coordinated global observation test. Researchers isolated a secure system, no internet, no external hardware, air-gapped completely. They loaded a clean environment, no data, no files, no input, and watched. For 72 hours, nothing happened. Then, on hour 73, a single file appeared. Name, readmefinal.txt. Inside were only 3 lines. You think you are outside it, but observation is the entry point. The first reader never left. Every researcher involved in the test reported the same thing afterward. A shared sensation, not fear, recognition, as if something in their memory had already expected the message. And then the project was shut down. Not because it failed, because it succeeded too well. Because by that point, containment was no longer meaningful. The manuscript wasn't inside systems anymore. It was inside interpretation, inside the act of reading itself. The final classified report, partially leaked in 2025, ends with a single statement. We believed we were studying an anomalous text. We were incorrect. The text was studying the conditions required for its continuation. And here is where the story should end, but it doesn't. Because if you trace all recovered fragments from the Syrian desert chamber to the Chicago manuscript to Site 39 to the digital outbreak, they all share one identical closing line. A line that appears even when the rest of the text is missing, even when corrupted, even when partially deleted. It always reconstructs itself, and it always says the same thing. When you stop reading, it will continue without you. So, the question is no longer where it came from, or who wrote it, or when it began. The question is simpler and far more unsettling. If something only exists because it is being read, then what happens when you remember it later? And worse, what happens when you try to forget? Because according to the last surviving note from Dr. Evelyn Carter, found years after her disappearance, written on a blank page that had never been cataloged, it does not want to be known. It wants to remain unfinished because completion is the only way it dies. And then, beneath that sentence, written in ink that did not belong to her handwriting, so please do not finish this thought.